Good morning, everybody. So I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to see so many familiar faces, but also some new ones as well. My name is Shannon Skoronsky, and I work in the Office of Nutrition and Health Promotion at the Administration on Aging. And I have the pleasure of moderating our first session, which will focus on interventions for persons with dementia. First, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. There are complete copies of their bios in the program, and I would encourage you to take a look at those. So to my left, Dr. Susan McCurry. Dr. McCurry is a research professor in psychosocial and community health at the University of Washington. To my immediate right is Michelle Barclay, who is the Vice President of Programs at the Alzheimer's Association, Minnesota, North Dakota chapter. And last but not least, Dr. Sandra Berger, who is an Associate Professor Emeriti and Gerontological Nurse Practitioner at the University of Illinois, Urbana. So to start us off, the panelists are going to give us a brief overview of their respective interventions, followed by a guided discussion where I'm going to pose some questions to the panelists and ask for a response. And finally, there's going to be some time for some interactive, open discussion. So in the guided discussion, there are really going to be four broad areas that we're going to ask the panelists to address. The first is to address the experience of community organizations in translating and implementing their respective interventions. The second area is successes and challenges in recruitment and retention of individuals with dementia in the programs. The third is sustainability, which I know is something that everybody is interested in. And finally, we'll be asking the panelists to make some recommendations for how the federal government, states, and private entities can promote the translation of research in the home and community-based settings. During the overview and panel discussion, I would encourage you to jot down questions because we're going to hold those for the open discussion at the end. And as Sue mentioned, we're going to give you an update between the guided discussion and the question and answer period on the Supreme Court announcement. So stay tuned. So first, I'd like to turn over the floor to Dr. Susan McCurry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here this morning. I know my colleague Linda Terry, who was planning on attending this meeting, is very sorry she's unable to be here with you today, so I'll do my best to represent her. I'm here to talk about this program that was developed by Dr. Terry and her colleagues at University of Washington called RDAD. RDAD stands for Reducing Disability in Alzheimer's Disease. RDAD is one of a series of evidence-based protocols that have been developed in Seattle that we've come to call the Seattle Protocols. And each of these Seattle Protocols have certain elements in common. They are theoretically grounded. The ideas for them come out of the basis of our clinical practice. Then there's collaboration that's ongoing with community providers who express interest. They're piloted by professional clinicians and then tested in randomized controlled trials. So the RDAD program, the randomized controlled trial, was published in 2003 in JAMA, and it's a 12-week program. There's 12 sessions over 3 months with in-home family caregiver training program. And the purpose of RDAD is to increase physical activity and exercise, so we teach the caregivers to act as exercise coaches for their care recipients with a series of exercises that include balance and flexibility that we're doing as warm-up and cool-downs. There's a strength program, training program for lower body strength, and aerobic or endurance activities. We also teach caregivers basic strategies for reducing challenging care-related behavioral disturbances, particularly things like depression and anxiety, but also challenges that have come as you are trying to implement the exercise training program itself. And then in combination with that, we teach basic good caregiver management strategies. So that's looking at activators and consequences of problem behaviors, looking at good communication skills, how to implement pleasant events into daily life with the caregivers, including making the exercise program itself a pleasant event, because that's an important part if it's going to be something that's sustainable in the life of the caregiving dyad. The randomized trial was conducted with 163 dyads in the community. And we found statistical and clinically significant outcomes that included reductions in behavior problems and depressions, particularly among individuals who had higher levels of depression. For example, at the start of the randomized trial, there was improvements in physical function and decreased institutionalization due to behavioral problems in folks that received RDAD compared to no treatment control. So what's happened since then with RDAD? RDAD has actually been translated now, or is being translated in a number of settings. I'm going to mention two in particular here. One with the state of Ohio. This translation is done with funding from the AOA. It was the state of Ohio partnering with the Alzheimer's Association in Ohio. It's been very exciting. It's been an ongoing project now. They're in the second year, the second grant of funding. It's overlapping grants for a total of 5 years. And I was talking just this morning to Sally, and she was telling me they've now enrolled over 600 dyads in this translation program and have 38 trainers across the state of Ohio. This started out as being just a single chapter in the association in Ohio with 8 trainers, and now we're up to over 600 families have benefited from being part of this program. In Washington and Oregon, Dr. Terry recently received funding for a grant from NIA to translate RDAD in 8 AAAs across the states of Washington and Oregon. There's going to be 5 AAAs in Washington and 3 in Oregon. And that study it's in the startup phases now. We're actually going to be doing our first training with the first 2 AAAs in the fall. We're very excited about how this is going to play out as we can see how our experiences map on to the experiences that Sally in Ohio has shown, where theirs was based in working with the Alzheimer's Association. We're going to be based with working with the AAAs. The next steps that we foresee with RDAD is looking at how can we translate it to a broader range of caregivers and patients, looking at more diverse agencies and living situations. We're going to be fortunate in that some of the AAAs that are going to be part of the new translation study have high levels of, or high numbers of culturally and linguistically different populations. So we've got Hispanics and Native Americans who are going to be in some of the AAAs that will be enriching our experience of how RDAD translates in the community. We're also going to be looking at how can we continue to integrate feedback from our community partners with program improvements. You know, RDAD as a randomized trial, and we'll talk more about this as a panel, I'm sure, in a little bit, had the very stringent eligibility criteria for the participants, the very strict instructions on who was allowed to deliver the intervention, all the things that you have with a randomized trial that once you're starting to translate it more broadly out into the community, you need to get feedback from your partners and try to think about what's going to make this feasible to really work in the real world, and yet at the same time maintain the integrity of the intervention that makes it efficacious. And so we're looking at how can we kind of get this feedback and modify the program over time. So the challenges are going to be what's funding is going to make it possible to do that ongoing implementation and program improvement, and for program sustainability, how we can continue to train community partners. In Ohio, they've been through several different training efforts to get the additional trainers in, and our own experiences with other programs that we've translated, we see the same thing. You have waves of translation, and we'll talk more about that too in terms of training the partners. So I think that's probably about my 5 minutes, and I'll talk more in the panel.
My name is Michelle Barclay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Early Identification and Support Project. First, I'm going to look at my watch because I don't know if it's humanly possible to talk about this in 5 minutes, but I'm going to give it my best shot. The Early Identification and Support Project is actually a larger project that involves 3 key pieces. One is increasing awareness about the importance of early identification and support, an overall awareness campaign. The second piece is working to increase early detection by physicians and physician offices and medical clinics. And the third piece, the third leg of the stool, if you will, is working on what happens after diagnosis, and specifically non-pharmacological treatments for people with early mild cognitive impairment and very early Alzheimer's disease. And today, right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the third leg of the stool, which is the non-pharmacological interventions. And specifically, I'm going to talk about two treatments. Mike, we did a focus group, and just to clue you in on this, because I didn't know this, I've been saying intervention for my whole life, and everybody understands what that means. But apparently, caregivers and people with early dementia, when you talk about interventions, think you're talking about what happens when your nephew's on drugs and the whole family comes together to do something. So I'm trying to say treatment, and I've started a tip jar where I put $1 in every time I say intervention, so I don't scare everybody when I talk about this, but I digress. So I'm going to talk about two non-pharmacological treatments for Alzheimer's disease, MCI and early Alzheimer's disease. The first one I'm going to say a little bit about is the Memory Club. This is a 10-week dyadic intervention. It's couples. They come together. The first hour is sort of an education piece. The second hour is more of a peer-to-peer support, so people break into their peer groups, care partners in one group, people with early dementia in another. Basically, this type of group addresses common themes that we see over time when people first get a diagnosis. We use this Taking Action workbook as kind of a manual for the program now. There's a reference in your materials, but common themes like diagnostic disclosure, legal and financial issues driving, things like that people struggle with at the beginning. I see it as kind of an introductory course for Alzheimer's disease. We started this work in Los Angeles and translated it there to other sites, replicated it to other sites, and then now, as I moved to the Twin Cities, have replicated in 5 sites in the Twin Cities, and we did some research on that. We didn't do a randomized study, but some initial research shows that over time, in 3 different groups, about 61 folks in 3 locations, we saw that over time, even though people had increased dependency in independent activities of daily living, we still saw increased care partner perceived effectiveness. So even though people thought, oh, my loved one's getting a little bit worse, I'm more effective in dealing with that, which I thought was really great. We also saw over time in the group increased number of preparation for care activities by care partners. So people actually took actions to be more prepared as care partners because of participation in the group. Generally speaking, everybody loves this. It's highly rated across care partners and people with early dementia. But when you look at the people with early dementia, that particular peer group, there seem to be differences in terms of satisfaction and increased confidence in carrying out day-to-day activities depending on how impaired somebody is. And I think this group works better for people who are mild cognitive impairment and very early dementia. I think sometimes we bring people in who are still relatively early and participate in the group but aren't early enough to get the maximum benefit. So that's what we learned about Memory Club. Another intervention that I'll talk to you about is relatively new being about a year, and we're playing with this. So this is we're playing with this kind of thing. We started a new group called Meet Up and Mentor. Meet Up and Mentor is really 2 programs that we smashed into one. The mentor component is we take people with early dementia who want to do something and make a difference, and we train them how to be mentors to other people who are newly diagnosed. And so as we get people who are calling in who have early dementia, we have mentors call those people back and invite them to a meetup. A meetup is a social gathering We also have an online site at meetup.com, so people can get together virtually as well as in person. And it's kind of a social networking program. This largely developed as the result of folks telling us that this was actually what they wanted. And it's been an enormous success, more so than I ever suspected. We have some very small initial data that looks like there are trends in people showing improvements in quality of life, emotional well-being, overall well-being, social satisfaction, but the biggest one was in feeling supported. Huge jump in feeling supported. And what we see anecdotally is that people are developing their social network and feeling not alone and starting to step up and do other things. And it's a real gateway program for other programs that we're developing, because you get an opportunity to see people in more of an informal setting without sitting them down and testing them immediately, whether or not they might be appropriate for other programs. So it's a nice, gateway program to other programs. We're doing for Meetup specifically with the national organization, and Beth is here, Kallmeyer from the National Alzheimer's Association. We're enrolling more people now at multiple sites to see if these trends continue once we have higher enrollment rates. Again, it's not a randomized controlled study, but in terms of early stage programmatic considerations, and we can talk about this a little bit later too, but I put some items that I think might be useful to talk about in terms of inclusion and exclusion criteria, really being clear about what you're talking about early dementia. I think I find as I look across the field that that definition is pretty loose. And even among, especially among people who are just general public, if you try recruiting for an early stage intervention, you will get everybody, because everybody is early stage. No one self-reports as middle stage or late stage. So this is a recruitment issue that we've solved with this Meetup program a little bit, where we're recruiting people for Meetup or getting people through physicians' offices. Again, we have a three-legged stool, but it helps us determine who might be most appropriate for other studies. And so we're selecting, instead of saying, come to this memory club that's really great and for people with early dementia, and people come, and then we say, oh, you're a little bit too advanced, you can't do it, which causes just not good feelings generally in life. Also, any early stage program has to have a transition plan. You can't keep a program early stage if you keep people in it who aren't early stage. And people don't think about this, I found, until it comes up in the program. Much better to think about that in advance. In terms of evaluation, we've had a little bit of issue with different people with early dementia have differing abilities to fill out pen and paper evaluation measures, and that can be a challenge, especially if the evaluation measures are too long or too numerous. I mean, care partners obviously don't have a problem, but it's a bit of a problem that I think we need to tweak a little bit with people with early dementia. Randomization is always an issue for us, as we are small and not heavily funded. And participation, especially in fun activities, is not always seen as the biggest priority in someone's life. So especially with Meetup, you get people who come and they enjoy it, but if their grandchild is born, they're probably going to skip that. So there's competing life things that happen. Everybody who's ever participated in a program with us has told us that social or networking time is important, and so I would say to consider integrating that into any early intervention, even if it's before the intervention starts. And then, of course, financial considerations, transportation, and then I'll give you one little piece which you cannot see here, but I think is in the packet, which is options. And I think it's important we look at this as creating a service continuum for people with early dementia, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all. There are many people who've worked on a variety of different pieces of this, what I call early stage service continuum, but I think it's important to continue to develop new interventions that fit into different places, study those, and have a cadre of options for people who are newly diagnosed. So they don't just get one thing and that's it. And I will stop talking. That was 7 minutes.